Today I'm going to show you how to increase the bust fit correctly so that the pattern will fit you if you happen to have a larger bust size than the grade rule size. And the first thing you're probably going to find out is that you're in a pattern size that is too large for you. Keep watching. Here we go. The first measurement you want to write down is your chest circumference. This is measured under your bust, against your skin, with a tape measure, of course, that is parallel to the floor. It's tight, but not so tight that it indents your skin. That's your first measurement. The next thing you want to do is add 2 inches to your chest circumference. That gives you a total, which is the measurement by which you choose your pattern size. If your chest measurement is 32, for example, and you add 2 inches, that gives you 34 inches. In my case, that is what happened. 34 inches means I choose a size 12 pattern. Is that my bust size? No, it's not. But that's the measurement that I use to choose the correct size. That puts me into a size 12. The size you need is your chest measurement plus 2 inches to give you the bust size. All right, now the next thing you want to write down is your bust circumference. Wear a good bra, measure over the bra. This is a fairly loose measurement, as loose as possible without it dropping away, and that gives you your bust measurement. The next thing you do is you take a look at the bust measurement on the pattern packet. You add 2 inches to it because the pattern actually has a bust measurement 2 inches larger than the measurement they're giving you on the pattern. All right, so in my case, it says 34 inches for a size 12. I add 2 inches, and that gives me the true bust measurement of the patterns. That measurement is 36 inches. My bust measurement is 38 inches. This means I need to add 2 inches into the bust circumference, and it needs to go in the front. If I were to have chosen my pattern size based on my bust size, I would have been in a pattern at least 2 sizes larger, and half the additional room I need in the bust would be in the back. Do you know anybody with bust in the back? I don't. So this is why you need to use the method I am telling you on this video, because this really works. The true pattern's bust measurement is 36 inches. Mine is 38. Subtract 36 from 38, and I need to add 2 inches. I divide that by half. That's 1 inch. That's the amount of additional bust width I need in the front of the pattern on one side of my front pattern. And of course, when I turn it over, there's another inch, so that gives me the 2 inches in the front. All this needs to be written down as you go, so you have this information. The next thing you need to measure is the distance between the 2 points of your bust. And write that measurement down and divide it by half, because that gives you the distance from the center front of your bodice to the peak of the bust. Then you also need to measure from your shoulder down to the point of your bust to give you the length from your shoulder to your bust point. Now you have all the measurements you need to correct your pattern. This is the blouse pattern that I want to use. The first thing I have done with this pattern is tape it down to the table and reduce all the seam allowances, because what on earth do I need with cutting the whole thing out on a 5/8 inch seam allowance and then trimming all the seams back? The industry doesn't do that. I've set it up with the seam allowances I'm going to use as I sew it together. I'm not going to have to trim anything back, so tracing this off with the seam allowances I want to use is going to, in the long run, save me a lot of time. The first thing I did was mark the straight grain, as you can see right here. And the second thing I did was mark the cross grain. It happened to be any line that happened to be at a 90-degree angle to the straight grain. So any line would do. Okay, so that's on. And what that means is that if the pattern shifts as I'm tracing, I can put it right back in place, because all I have to do is find the center between the cross grain and the straight grain and put those 2 lines back in place, and then everything else is in place as well. I have reduced the armhole 3/8 of an inch because I plan to have a sleeve in this, and a 3/8 of an inch is strong enough to hold the sleeve correctly without having a lot of extra seam allowance. I would have a 1/4 if it's going to be sleeveless, but these days I prefer to have sleeves in my garments. On the side, it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm planning to sew a French seam there, and I need a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. Same with the shoulder, that's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And around the neck, I've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And as far as the length is concerned, I've kept the full length of the blouse because everybody likes plenty of blouse to tuck in. All right, so that's what's there. And I've also traced off this dart here. This is not a bust dart. This is a waist dart that's going to pull this in at the waist, and it's also going to pull in here. My guess is that I'm going to need to expand this waistline a bit here because my waist isn't as small as it used to be. I've also traced off the true bust point here, although it's probably wrong and not right for me. All right, so now that I have all that copied, I didn't bother to copy the facing because I probably put a separate facing on it. I might want to make the lap each a little wider here. I don't know what I want to do with that, so I didn't bother to copy that. So I can now take the original pattern away and put it back in the pattern packet. And if something goes wrong with this, I can always go back to this and check what happened. Now that's important to keep a trail so that if you make a mistake and you don't know what's wrong, you can go back and see. And I see right here when I look that I do not have the armhole notch. So I'm going to put it back in place. I'm going to line it right back up on this cross and straight grain line. As you can see right there, bingo. And now, here is the notch. Well, I don't know for sure, but probably the notch won't line up right with the sleeve notch, but at least I have some idea where it's supposed to be. And that all has to be checked out. You have to check all your seam allowances. You have to check all the notches and everything when you're making something, because in the end, when you sit down to sew, all you do is just sew it together. So you need to know that your patterns sew correctly, and the way you do that is by making sure your patterns are correct. All right, this one can now be put away, and like I said, this is being put away so I can check if something goes wrong with this. All right, and this is a size 12 that I copied, and I'm going to write on it size 12. It's my pattern, so I'm going to put LRL on it, and I'm going to put the date, and it happens to be August. Well, I'm going to put September because in 2 days it's going to be September. September 2021. That's important. Date everything so you know when you did it and what you did. All right, now that we've got that done, the next thing is to determine how to put in the bust darning. Now, this pattern looks like it has no bust darning at all, but actually this is a fairly loose fit and would fit a B cup fine, but it's not going to fit me fine because I need more room through the bust. It's very important to keep measurements written down and to measure them out and to keep a track of what you're doing. And I'm going to put a date on this too. This is Laurel, and this is September 2021, and it's size 12. So I know, and I will put that with my information about my pattern. So the next time I decide to make something, and I don't sew very often because what I make lasts. So I need to have this information ready if I'm going to make something else so that I don't have to figure all this out again. What did I do and how did I do it? And I have down here that the width between the 2 points is 6.5, which divided by 2 is 3 1/4. All right, we double on the bottom and we halve the large number. So half of 6 is 3, and 1/2 of 1/2 is just double 2. So that's 4 1/4. So this needs to be 3 1/4. I'm measuring 3 1/4 inches, which is half of 6.5 inches, so that I get the true bust point that will fit me correctly. This is very important. All right, the next thing I need to know is how far down it is from the shoulder, and I've already measured that, which is 11 1/2 inches. I need to mark the seam allowance, which is 1/2 inch seam allowance, because I'm measuring from the seam allowance. Okay, so that's 1/2 inch, and now I'm going to measure down 11 1/2 inches from the seam allowance. I want this line to come all the way through so I can make a true measurement. And that is where my bust point should be. As you can see, the grade rule bust point is above that. Mine is lower. And that's important to know. And then when I look at this, you see this waist dart should be moved so it's the same distance from my point here as it is from the point here for the grade rule. And that needs to move over. See, that's 1/4 of an inch from that point. So we need to move this over 1/4 of an inch. And there's an easy way to do that. I'm going to show you how right now. You take a scrap of tracing paper, and the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to hold it down, of course, so it doesn't move while I'm working. And I'm going to trace the grade rule point here. And I'm going to trace the dart. It's curved, but you can just use the transparent ruler to get it marked in. I also want to put a straight grain line on this so that this stays parallel. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over, and see what I'm doing? I'm moving it down so it now lies over my true bust point. So I've moved the dart over, and the little line that I drew here, we'll make sure that's parallel, and it is. My students all think this is a great thing to do, and they all seem to want to be able to do it the same way I do it. All right, so now I'm going to put this in place here. I've got this straight grain line here down at the bottom, which is fairly light, and I want to pivot this until this is right. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I may need to change that later. I'm just putting that there for now. All right, the next thing I need to do is I need to set up this pattern so that it will fit me. And I'm going to take this line all the way down to the bottom of the pattern. There's all sorts of ways to manipulate darts. For instance, flanges, gathering, princess seams, a number of ways that darts can be camouflaged. Yokes is another way to have a yoke in the garment. It's amazing how much darting can be hidden and people are unaware that there is darting there. So don't look at this and say, oh my goodness, I need extra bust darting and now I've got to put darts in. No, you put the dart in and then you manipulate it so you have the look you want. It's worth the effort because your clothes are going to fit you so much better and look so much better if you need this. First, I'm going to mark the sewing line here at the armhole. And as you remember, I reduced the seam allowance to 3/8 of an inch. And I've also written it here so that I know that. All right, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line from the notch right on down to the true bust point. Now this, of course, is my true bust point, not the point that's put on the pattern, because we want this pattern to fit me, not the grade rule. All right. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line in approximately here at a slight angle. And there we go. Now the next thing I'm going to do after that is I'm going to cut these lines so that I can break this open. These are my paper shears. Be sure you use separate scissors for cutting paper because paper will dull your shears. Cut that open like that and tape this all down right so that it stays in place. Then I'm going to cut just a little bit above it. Lay this down in place here. And I'm going to put some tape on this cut along here so that I've got it down to the paper so it won't move on me. From this point, just to my mark line. So we're going to cut here. This is just a fraction that I'm leaving. I want the seam allowance here to be marked because that's a 1/2 inch. Did I get that right? Yeah, that's 1/2 inch. All right, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut that line to just a fraction before this point. This is opening up to give more room across the bust. So how much room do we really need? From our measurements, I needed 2 more inches across the bust. Divided by 2, because it's half on each side, that means I need to increase the width through the bust 1 inch, which I'm going to do now. I'm going to measure down this cut line right here and add 1 inch. And again, I'm doing it with my red pencil. And there we have the line. And now the next thing is to bring these 2 pieces over to here and tape them in place. It looks as though this is the dart, but it's not. This is the true bust point. We're going to first of all mark the true bust dart and then mark the sewn bust dart, because you wouldn't want a sewn bust dart to go all the way to the point. But when you draft and move the dart around, you want to know where the true bust point and true bust dart are. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw in the true bust dart, which is drafted from here from the sewing line to the true bust point, which is here. And here, this goes here back to the, I'm going to put it here so you can see, seam allowance right there at the side seam. Oops, it's moved on me. And that gives me the true bust point. As a matter of fact, I'm going to draw over it with blue so you can see it better. And that's the true bust point. Now, unfortunately, I did this too soon, so I'm going to take this apart and move this where it belongs as well. All right, and you can see that tears right off, in spite of the fact I made that mistake. All right, and you can see the line here. That's where it goes because there's still a mark right there. So I don't have any problem. I can put it right back in place. I made a mistake, but I fixed it. We'll tape all that in place like that. So far, so good. We've still got a number of corrections that need to be made to make this pattern fit. You see, when this comes over the bust, it has to come over a curve. All right, so the whole front of the pattern has to come over that curve, and this needs to be lengthened as well. There's a very easy way to do this. You see this line here? This simply has to be moved down. When you work with patterns, you're going to have marks over top of marks, and you're going to paste and fix, and that's just the way it goes. It's just part of it. This is messy. I'm getting what I need. So now I'm going to cut this piece away because it needs to be moved down. Okay. And just take the black pencil and mark the cross grain line across like that. And if you remember, the cross grain came across here, but it's now been moved down, so we just move the whole pattern down and line it up. This stays, of course, stays in place because it's in relationship to the true bust point. I'm going to put some washers here to hold it in place while I check to make sure that it's correct. And now this line continues straight on down. And so does this. And we have moved this portion down. And we'll tape this. And then this, of course, doesn't come quite square with this, so I'll use the skirt curve just to blend them in. Okay, that looks pretty good. There we go. And then this, of course, squares right over here. Make sure it's square. We want everything to square at center front and center back. Unless the person is asymmetrical, everything squares at center front and center back because you don't want points this way or this way at either place. All right, now a lot has been done to this pattern, and it's now, as you can see, a pretty big mess. So the next thing is to trace this off so we can proceed. Okay, so now I have traced off the pattern because the work was becoming so messy that it was time to make a tracing. So here it is, it's all traced, and as you can see, it now has my true bust point on it. It has my true bust dart. The dart here was moved over, and that is in the correct place. And I've written on it all the different seam allowances that are to be used. Center front is right here, cross grain is here, so I can automatically put it back into position on the previous pattern if I should need to. I'm going to take the pattern underneath and I'm going to write on it, hold. This is my blouse pattern, and this is, I'm putting September 2021, and this is a size 12, so I know, and it's hold. I've circled that. I'm going to take this up off the table and put this aside. Now, if I should need to go back and check anything, I have the pattern. You don't destroy these patterns as you progress through the work until you know that your pattern fits. And once it fits, and you've been successful at making your first garment off of it, then you can destroy the previous work that you've done. All right, so now let's see how this fits. Is this going to fit me or not? So the first thing I'm going to do is just take off some of this bottom paper because it's in a mess. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold the dart and see if it fits me correctly. How well is this doing? You'll always want to check your work as you go. You want to find the mistakes as you make them so that you can correct them then and don't have to go back later and do it. All right, so I'm folding this right on the point, and then I'm going to take it and lay this up over this, and bingo. Now you'll notice that the seam allowance doesn't line up, but that's not a problem. That's going to be fixed. This is one of those little things that happens that you just fix. And I'm going to mark the shoulder line, shoulder sewing line. All right, now let's see how well this fits. Do I want this dart to become right to the point? Of course not. Am I satisfied with this the way it is? Well, it's looking pretty good, but I want to do some more changes. All right, so now that you've seen how to put the dart in, oh, by the way, also, if you're going to leave the dart like this, this is what you would want to do. When you make the muslin, you find out how far back to put the sewn point. It's not always the same for everybody. Home sewing panels will say move it back an inch or whatever. That's just arbitrary. You want to put it back where it's going to look best on you. Let's say I'm going to move it back an inch. This is just for, like, if you wanted to do this, okay? Move it back. All right, so you want to know about midway here, about where it goes, and then you would mark the seam allowances here, which is half an inch and half an inch, and then you bring from this point, you come back to the sewing line like this, and like that, and that gives you your sewn bust point. But you need to check this with your muslin. All right, and once you do that, then you refold the pattern. And now you're folding on the red lines, of course. You bring the red lines up. And that's when you correct this side seam here. You want to just blend these lines in together. So see that? It's a little more on one side and a little less on the other. And then you need to turn it over and you need to trace a line on the other side of the tracing paper. The great thing about tracing paper is that you can mark on both sides. All right, so now we open this back up again and you can see the corrections where the red lines are that would come here. And let's see, we don't have it across the actual dart. So here's the dart. All right, so you turn the dart over and then you get the line here that you see underneath. See that? And that gives you your dart marking, and that's how you get that. It's better not to have a dart sewn to a particular point. It's better to have the darting put in some loose way that regardless of how your bust is a couple years later, the garment's still going to look good on you. And the way to do that, one of the ways to do that is with a princess seam. Or you can have a yoke. There's a number of ways you can do it. If you're working with chiffon, if I were making this blouse in chiffon, I would simply have gathers over the side because you don't want to have stitching showing in chiffon. All right, so this is how you would go about putting it in a princess seam. And this is something that really has to be fitted on the human body. So you would want to take it in muslin and you would actually rotate this dart from the true bust point. So let's say we're going to rotate it up into the shoulder like this. So these are just arbitrary lines I'm putting here. And you bring it on down and bring it on down into this dart that's here. And this is just an idea. And then you want to cut the patterns apart and add a 3/8 inch seam allowance. That's what you want on a princess seam. And you can see that now you have two patterns. This is going to rotate up. This is on the true bust point, of course, almost to the point. And we're going to close the dart here like this. And you can see it opening up and you can see the princess seam coming into play. Put some tracing paper underneath. See that? This is closing up here. We want this to close tight there. And this is something you really need to drape over the body. Now this is coming too close to the point. So you would want this seam to then come more like this. Do you see? And do you see how it's coming into this dart here? And that's where it would go. You want to test all this in muslin. Don't cut out your fashion fabric directly from the pattern and then try to fit it. What you wind up with is a garment that looks like it's been worn here, there, and everywhere, and you haven't even worn it the first time. You want your patterns to fit you correctly before you ever cut the fashion fabric. Then you cut the fashion fabric and you sew it together and you put it on and you wear it. No fittings whatsoever. That's how the industry does it. That's how you achieve high-end, beautiful clothing. This is the sewing line, okay? You have to add seam allowances, all right? So here it comes right on down here. See, here's the amount. I'm picking up the amount there that's here. Come on up like this. So we take that amount out of the garment, and then it comes back over here. And then it moves in like that, from here to here, from here to here, here to here, here to here. You have the front panel, and from here to here, here to here, here to here, here to here, you have the side front. And you need to add seam allowances on there. The seam allowance that you would add would be 3/8 of an inch. You want to walk the one side against the other and put notches in, especially through the bust area, so that as you sew it, you're easing in. There'll be a certain amount of ease that you'll have to ease in here. See, this dart is not close to the point, so there's going to be a little more ease on this side than on this side. So you need to have a notch here and there, and a notch here, and about there, and a notch about here, and about there. So this all eases in correctly so it fits you. And that's how you do a French seam. And that, ladies, is it for today. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. It's a fact. Most people, almost all people, are wearing clothes that don't fit. Whether you sew for yourself, sew for others, or are hoping to work in the industry, this is the information you need to know because it works. You need to understand grading because you can use it not only to grade patterns to the different sizes, but also you can use grading to develop various style patterns. When you work through this book, the first thing you do is develop a pattern that fits you. You also have grading coordinates from which you can grade patterns to fit and eliminate the fitting problem, not just on your size, but on other sizes as well. So let's say that you wear a size 30. You can buy a size 16, grade it to a size 30, and it will fit you, guaranteed. It's been proven over and over again in my classes. This is the book you need if you want your clothes to fit you.